The train sighed as it finally surrendered its momentum. Steam burst from hidden valves and drifted across the Kansas prairie, spreading low and white like milk spilled across a wooden table. The platform beneath the freight cars trembled as couplers struck one another down the line, metal knocking metal until the noise faded into the ticking of cooling iron. When the echoes died, only softer sounds remained: the tapping of canes, the scrape of boots, the careful murmurs of men bracing themselves for the next movement. Guards called gently, not with the bark of drill sergeants, but with the tone of hospital orderlies. "Easy now. Take it slow." The doors clanged open, and from the dim freight cars emerged men who had once carried rifles and engines and orders across continents. Now they looked like survivors from a broken civilization. Their uniforms were salt-stained from the Atlantic crossing, collars undone, insignia stripped away. Bandages wrapped heads and shoulders. Some men leaned on sticks carved from scrap wood. Others were lifted down because they no longer had arms to hold their own weight. Sergeant Otto Voss paused at the edge of the step, fingers tight around an iron railing. Where his right leg had once been, there was now only a short stump of bone wrapped in gauze, aching with every shift of balance. 30 years old, aircraft mechanic of the Africa Corps, proud once, reduced now to hesitation. He had prepared himself for shouting, for insults, for the victorious to enjoy the sight of defeat. Instead, the first words he heard came in a calm Midwestern accent. "Need a hand, fella?" An American corporal stood below, palms open. Voss stared, then allowed the stranger to take part of his weight. The warmth of another human startled him more than the pain. After weeks in the damp cold of the ship, the Kansas air felt thick and alive, heavy with dust, hay, and the faint sweetness of wheat baking under the August sun. Cicadas rattled invisibly in the trees. The light was merciless, turning every scar into relief, every piece of metal into a mirror. Beyond the fence waited olive-drab trucks marked with white crosses. Orderlies moved with practiced calm, guiding stretchers and wheelchairs into place. "Next. Mind your step. We'll get you settled." The Germans exchanged glances, suspicion mixing with disbelief. Why waste medicine on the enemy? Voss expected to be counted, herded, reduced to a number. Instead, a young medical lieutenant wrote his name carefully on a clipboard and said, "Don't worry about rank. We just need to know how to help you." The translator repeated it in uncertain German. Voss could not answer. He was lifted into a truck already filled with wounded men. Tin cups of water waited on benches. One officer whispered, "They are filming this for mercy." Another murmured, staring at endless farmland, "Then they are very good actors." Dust rose behind the convoy as it rolled toward a cluster of white barracks beneath a small, lazy flag. Camp Concordia. The guard towers looked less like fortresses and more like farm silos. At the gate, a guard saluted out of habit. No one returned it. Inside, nurses and medics were already waiting. Clean wards, folded blankets, glasses of milk on metal tables. The smell was iodine and soap, not fear. This camp held the war's most fragile spoils. Broken bodies, more than 4,000 of them, scattered far from Europe in the wide middle of America. The Geneva Convention demanded humane treatment. The War Department went further. Mercy, it believed, was proof of civilization. Camps were designed like clinics, with ramps for wheelchairs and red crosses painted large enough for pilots to see from the sky. Daily life followed rigid order. At dawn the bugle woke guards and prisoners alike. Breakfast came, powdered eggs and bitter coffee. The able-bodied went to nearby farms to replace missing labor. The disabled remained inside, sorting mail, keeping the library, repairing tools. And at the heart of the camp stood the prosthetic workshop. Inside, saws hummed and files whispered over wood. Germans and Americans worked side by side. Aluminum from scrap aircraft became knee joints. Old tires became saws. Measurements were taken with patience instead of judgment. They laughed when fittings squeaked and started again. The enemy who had bombed factories now rebuilt himself with the enemy's tools. Letters home described the confusion. "Machines here serve compassion," one man wrote. "They teach us how to stand again. Not conversions, just astonishment." Outside the wire, Kansas farmers watched former enemies harvest wheat beside their sons' empty homes. Some invited them to supper. Newspapers answered complaints simply, "America fights cruelty by refusing to imitate it." American veterans sometimes visited, sleeves rolled to show scars. They joked through translators, shared cigarettes, compared prosthetics. The Germans studied them quietly, learning how a nation treated its wounded. Late afternoons grew silent. Bread smelled warm in the kitchens. Men learned to walk again in dusty light, defeat shedding its armor. Winter arrived, frost turning fields pale. Inside the workshop, stoves glowed, rubber smelled of oil and sweat. Sergeant Voss practiced every day. Earl Stevens, the American machinist with 3 missing fingers, coached him gently. "You don't salute with a leg," he said. "You walk on it." When Voss managed 3 perfect steps, Stevens clapped once. "That's the sound of the war ending right here." In February, inspectors arrived. They watched the men walk and said quietly, "These men can return to life." American amputees visited from Denver, tossing baseballs with hook hands, laughing. One shared a cigarette with Voss, striking a match on metal. For a minute they were simply men. Understanding shifted. Strength no longer meant domination. In his notebook, Voss wrote, "Perhaps the strong nation is the one that refuses to discard the broken." When the war ended, the camp grew quiet. No cheers, only breathing. Men returned to fields, to tractors, to lemonade offered by farm wives who laughed and told them to drink before the ice melted. Repatriation orders came in autumn. The men received envelopes, new prosthetics, cigarettes. The final night, guards and prisoners traded small gifts. Earl gave Voss a wrench engraved with his initials. Even good legs need maintenance. At dawn the trucks rolled out again. At the gate, Voss stood balanced on his new leg and said, "I walk because of you." The doctor nodded. That was the idea. Back in Germany, ruins greeted them. Children whispered about American legs. Voss found work repairing machines, the wrench on his belt. He never spoke of ideology again, only of adjustment, of making unequal parts work as one. Years later, only grass covered Camp Concordia. But beneath it remained something rarer than victory. Proof that in the middle of war, mercy could rebuild what hatred destroyed. That sometimes the real peace begins not with treaties, but with 2 hands lifting a stranger from a train.